The media dismissed him for many, many months, but Donald Trump winning back-to-back primaries, they are now, grudgingly or not, acknowledging he's a strong front runner. But on his big night in South Carolina, Trump said he'd been watching the coverage, and even though the commentators were fair overall, there was this.
A number of the pundits said, well, if a couple of the other candidates dropped out, if you add their scores together, it's going to equal Trump. Right? These geniuses, they're geniuses. They don't understand that as people drop out, I'm going to get a lot of those votes also. You don't just add them together.
And we have geniuses joining us now to analyze the campaign coverage. Mary Catherine Ham, editor-at-large at Hot Air and a Fox News contributor. Heidi Presbella, senior political correspondent at USA Today. And Julie Roginski, a Fox News contributor and a regular on Outnumbered. Mary Catherine, I've argued for 8 long months on this network, the media must take Trump seriously. Are the pundits now coming out of denial?
Well, there's a couple steps here. I don't know if you're familiar with the stages of grief. We've gone from denial to anger to now bargaining. And we're going to be bargaining. I'm in bargaining. We're going to bargain hard. And the media is going to be happy to cover all these scenarios whereby these guys can start chomping off a little bit of Trump's support. But look, I think it is true that people can come together and coalesce into an anti-Trump candidate. The question is whether any of these guys that remain are going to get out, and that will continue to be a bargaining story moving forward.
Yes, it's not that the race ended yesterday, but Heidi, given all the airtime that Trump gets, and we've talked about many times, how much of some of the mainstream pundits actually helped Trump so far?
You know, I think that's an important distinction because you have the pundits and then you have the mainstream press, and it's very different. And if you remember from almost the beginning, some of the commentators who get the most airtime, who reach millions of people, were taking Trump seriously from the beginning. Guys like Joe Scarborough in the morning show, Mark Halperin, guys like that, who said you have to take him seriously. Then you combine that with the live coverage that, sorry, no other candidate got, even though when you look at the raw percentage numbers, Bernie Sanders was getting about the same numbers in terms of the percentage, not getting that kind of coverage.
MSNBC takes many of his rallies live, and sometimes the other cable networks dip in, and the press conferences tend to be live. But isn't that balanced by the fact that you have people on the right and the left? And I mean, this network, you look at George Will and Charles Krauthammer and Rich Lowry and Karl Rove, you know, who are basically being, I'll put it diplomatically, highly critical of the billionaire.
And do you see them on MSNBC? See, so that if you're assuming that the American public channel surfs and looks at all the different networks to try and get their most balanced coverage, then maybe you could make that case. But when we know that people in this country don't get their news that way. So.
Julie, let's put up the cover of the New York Daily News, which does not like Trump. Today's headline, Confederacy of Dunces blaming the voters of South Carolina for the result. I mean, I think it's becoming kind of a biased rag and almost a parody of a newspaper. But does this indicate that there is still a section of the media that are going to fight him every step of the way?
There is a huge section of the media, that's the tabloids, so you really can't take them seriously as establishment media. But I will say, look, I said this before, we in the media, or not maybe me, but a lot of people in the media, are the drug dealers that feed this crack addiction. Regardless of how you feel about Donald Trump, they put him on the cover. They're not putting, I don't know, Ted Cruz on the cover. They're not putting anybody else on the cover. Whether you have people that you just mentioned trashing him or complimenting him, and nevertheless, we're all talking about him across every network, across every demographic.
This sounds vaguely illegal, the crack addiction.
Well, you should be, but it's not, apparently.
Both carrying him live and fighting with him, even as a media person, gets you viewers, gets you people, which is why folks who would like to challenge him should have maybe fought with him earlier, Cruz and Rubio among.
I say again and again that the negative coverage helps Trump in part because he runs against the press, which is not a popular institution. Just want to briefly mention, you talked about mainstream pundits. So on MSNBC last night, primary night, Chris Matthews and especially Lawrence O'Donnell were among those saying, well, if this person drops out and this happens and the sun rises over here, you know, he could still be beaten. And Brian Williams, anchoring, said to Lawrence, "You sound like a Democrat at the salad bar of rationalization." All right, so we saw a lot of commentators obviously jumping on this extraordinary news of Donald Trump and Pope Francis exchanging less than pleasantries and saying this would hurt Trump. Let's take another look at how that exchange went.
A person who thinks only about building walls, wherever they may be, and not of building bridges, is not Christian. This is not the gospel.
The Pope said something to the effect that maybe Donald Trump isn't Christian, okay? And he's questioning my faith. I was very surprised to see it, but I am a Christian. I'm proud of it. Okay. For a religious leader to question a person's faith is disgraceful.
Now, interestingly, the pundits didn't exactly excommunicate Trump for those sharp words against the pontiff, who did start it by questioning his faith.
Oh, the Lord giveth the Donald another media cycle right before the South Carolina primary. No, I think, look, there was a lot of coverage of this that was like, is this real life? There was a point at which this gets so insane, this war of words between Trump and the Pope. I would caution people that escalating a war of words with the Pope, let's imagine what would happen escalating wars of words with leaders elsewhere in the world.
I have to actually correct something, too, because the Pope didn't technically start this. A month ago, Donald Trump referred to this Pope as a very political Pope. And then if you look also at the way that the question was worded to the Pope, it was kind of a very leading question.
Well, I have some of that for you, and this hasn't gotten as much coverage. So the question, this is on the Pope's plane coming back from Mexico to the Vatican. And Phil Palella, Reuters correspondent who covers the Vatican, says to the pontiff, Trump said you're a pawn of the Mexican government. He wants to build a wall, deport 11 million illegal immigrants, separating families. What do you think of these accusations against you, and can a North American Catholic vote for a person like this? So, is that a fair and balanced question? Seems kind of loaded
It's a leading question, and if you're reporting it in print or broadcast, I think the context here is very important. Whenever you're asking anyone this type of question, but also this Pope apparently has, he's a human being too. He's prone to anger and to responding to things that might sound insightful. And I think, in hindsight, now you're seeing both the Pope and Donald Trump kind of roll back a little bit, trying to de-escalate this.
I just want to set you up with the soundbite. So Trump did soften on CNN. Let's take a quick look at what he had to say.
And the Pope made the statement, and I think it was probably a little bit nicer statement than it was reported by you folks in the media, because after I read it, it was a little bit softer.
Well, first of all, if there's nothing that you can count on as much as the sun rising in the east, is that Donald Trump will walk back every incendiary statement he makes, just as surely as he makes it. I will say, though, Donald Trump won, I think it's pronounced Beaufort, but Beaufort County, the most Catholic county, the only Catholic majority county in South Carolina, he won it. So I guess picking a fight with the Pope is not necessarily bad if you're trying to appeal to Catholic voters.
But is your point about the walking back that Trump makes the incendiary charge, throws out the controversial comments, gets an explosion of coverage, and then when he's asked about it in interviews, and he's always doing interviews, to his credit, he softens? Every time, so that he can then say, I didn't say that. Why would they say he said that? And points to the part where he softens. So the base that appeals to whatever incendiary thing he says responds to it, but then he thinks in the general election terms he can say, well, I walked it back. I don't know what they're saying.
I would say, in general, the media covering the Pope, I think, tends to shove all of his comments into our rubric and want him to comment on American politics, and maybe we could be a little bit more nuanced about the way we address the Pope and ask him questions and then write about it.
I think people are aware that this Pope has also been a little bit more, if you want to say, political, having been out there when he came to his visit to the U.S. I'm talking very openly about things on the environment and kind of like telling truth to his followers.
Abortion and divorce, and many conservatives see him as left-leaning, whether that's fair or not. Okay, so we're talking about the way that Trump sort of controls the media dialogue, which he has done throughout this campaign. So when he gets into it with Ted Cruz, we saw the sound bites earlier, and says he's going to sue Senator Cruz over an ad he didn't like. Are we just then devouring that, and then Cruz has to respond, of course, and now you're on Trump's turf?
Well, yes, and also it's a story. I mean, it is a story when these two seeming frontrunners fight each other. I do think that this played out on another level, with Rubio sort of grabbing the Trump attacks on Cruz and using them to his advantage as well, which showed up in exit polling with people thinking his campaign was unfair. On that point, Marco Rubio apparently has finished second in South Carolina, the final tally not in. But he made a big deal, and then the media made a big deal about this Photoshop picture that showed Rubio shaking hands with President Obama, kind of casting him as a dirty trick, and Cruz as a deceitful guy. Did you think it deserved that much coverage?
I don't know about that one particular instance, but the problem was, and here's where Donald Trump was right, that it was part of a pattern of things that we were seeing all the way back to Iowa, including the robocalls, including this photoshopping. In the Trey Gowdy Facebook page, and so it played in. The reason why it got a lot of coverage is because it played into a narrative. And I don't know if you saw, but Ted Cruz himself was aware that, oh, man, this is really going off the rails, and he pulled Ben Carson into some kind of a storage locker and tried to say, hey, man, come on, let's be friends again. It didn't work.
This was a Daily Beast reporting on this closet meeting between Cruz and Carson. I love that. But on this Photoshop thing, I think it was obvious. It wasn't an attempt to deceive. It obviously wasn't a real photo. Their heads had been put on a different photo. Finally, Trump this morning, been on 4 Sunday shows so far, and he tweeted about the Wall Street Journal, which had that Wall Street Journal NBC poll, which had the South Carolina race down to 5 points. He won by double digits. Wall Street Journal should fire both its pollster and its editorial board. Seldom has a paper been so wrong, totally biased. All right, fine to criticize the poll, but the editorial board is supposed to be biased. It's an opinion group of people.